Hey, Matthew Lippman. Thank you so much for joining me here on Walking Inside Poems.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this, been diving into Alan Dugan. I reached out to you because I read the blog post that you did in 2016 in the Baltimore Review.
Oh
Yeah, yeah.
God,
I
that's pretty
love the way
funny.
I love what you said about Dugan. I'll probably quote a little bit from that, but yeah,
Sounds
you
good.
chose the poem Note, which I think is great that the poem title is Note, the Sea Grinds Things Up. Before we get into that, if you will, do us a favor and just I'll put links in the show notes to you, but tell people
Okay.
who you are.
My name's Matthew Lippman. I'm a poet and a teacher. I teach middle school kids right now in Massachusetts. Have a long history of teaching high school kids as well, and I love listening to music. So
What music
yeah.
do you what are some of your favorite bands or
Uh,
genres or
yeah. I mean, I don't even know what to call it now or anymore. It used to be jazz, but I don't. That word is kind of confining. Things have stretched out quite a bit.
Mhm.
It's what's today? 29. So 5 days ago was the 50th anniversary of Keith Jarrett's the Clone concert, and
Yeah.
so I've been listening to that. And there's this amazing Norwegian guitar player named Jakob Bro,
Yes.
who you know his music.
I've been trying to get Jakob on my other podcast for about a year, and he agreed at one point, and then we
Oh
just haven't got
man,
it
that's
yet.
beautiful.
Well, I've got
Yeah.
you. I'm sure you're familiar with Bill Frisell.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I've had Bill on twice, and that's been it was amazing. I had Joe Lovano on,
Yeah.
Jonathan Blake. Yeah, I've been very fortunate with that podcast. But
I
right,
saw the Frizzell. I saw your Frizzell one. Yeah.
did you? Okay, cool.
Yes. Not. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just remembering that Karen McCadden is who pointed me to you. Are you friends with Karen or
Yes. Karen and I are uh, very good, deep friends. We go way back, 20
Mhm.
years. Yeah. She's an amazing poet and person, and we got like a brother sister poet
Mhm.
thing happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, when I talked to her, she said, "You need to talk to Matthew." So, yeah, thanks again for joining us here. This is cool. So, yeah, Alan Dugan,
There it
man,
is.
he
Yeah.
he's perfect for this podcast because one of the ways it's sort of evolving is I'm trying to steer things away a little bit from, the typically anthologized poems and poets. And Dugan is perfect because, I mean, I don't think it's an overstatement to say he was a great poet.
Oh,
Uh,
totally.
and yet, how many people know who he is other than those of us who are kind of intimately familiar with poetry? So, yeah, I mean, the guy's first book wins the National Book Award and the Pulitzer. That's a
Yeah.
nice start.
No, yeah, it's good stuff.
That's a nice start. Well, hey, let me read the poem, and then let's
Okay.
talk about Dugan. I want to hear some of your thoughts just about the man in general, and then we will
Okay.
get into this
Sounds
poem.
great.
Again, it's called Note. The sea grinds things up. It's going on now, as these words appear to you or are heard by you. A wave slaps down flat. Water runs up the beach, then wheels and slides back down, leaving a ridge of sea foam, weed, and shells. One thinks, I must break out of this horrible cycle, but the ocean doesn't. It continues through the thought. A wave breaks. Some of its water runs up the beach and down again, leaving a ridge of scum and skeletal debris. One thinks, I must break out of this cycle of life and death, but the ocean doesn't. It goes past the thought. A wave breaks on the sand, water planes up the beach and wheels back down, hissing and leaving a ridge of anything it can leave. One thinks, I must run out the life part of this cycle, then the death part of this cycle, and then go on as the sea goes on in this cycle after the last word. This is not the last word unless you think of this cycle as some perpetual inventory of the sea. Remember, this is just one sea, on one beach, on one planet, in one solar system, in one galaxy. After that, the scale increases. So this is not the last word, and nothing else is talking back. It's a lonely situation.
Oh man, I've been reading that poem for I don't know how many years, and that last line, it's just
Yeah,
it's everything. It's
yeah,
everything. Yeah.
yeah. It's and it's very Alan Dugan, isn't it? He was no romantic, uh,
Not at all. Not at all.
and pretty tough, pretty crusty old guy. Well, let me ask you just some general thoughts about Dugan first before we get
Yeah,
into
sure.
yeah
Yeah.
what appeals to you? What has been your uh, and 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 maybe you'll do it unintentionally, but I'd love for you to kind of quote from that blog post about that first reading when you went to see him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I had no I would, I was this little 24, 5-year-old hot shot who didn't know nothing, right?
Yeah,
And got into the writer's workshop, and I'm from New York, and
yeah,
I grew up on these sort of tough streets in the '70s of the Upper West Side before it became infiltrated with money and bouginess and all that crap, and he came out onto the stage in some auditorium with a cane, and he just started reading these poems with curse words and that sort of angry but not angry gravelly voice, and I was like, this is what I want to do. This is the kind of poet I want to be. I don't want to be like Marvin Bell or Jory Graham or James Tate. This was like, he was so playground and street to me, and at the same time incredibly smart, like, you know Virgil and Dante and Greek mythology and Eliot and the tree myths. Like, it all kind of came together in this way that felt uh, completely authentic and natural. And that feeling like, oh, you've heard musicians say, yeah, I heard Dylan and I knew that that's what I wanted to do, or I heard the Beatles, or I heard Elvis Presley, or I heard Bo Diddley. And that's the way I felt when I heard him read his poems. It was like a rock show for me.
yeah.
Um, so I've been aspiring towards that ever since.
How long ago would that have been?
That was 1988. So that was a
88.
long time ago.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah.
yeah.
Um,
In this blog post, by the way, you say Dugan bored a hole into me, and the poems he read, they burned me down. They burned the whole room down. This is
yeah.
great. This is great. Really
He
enjoyed
was
it.
like, whether it was intentional or not, I'm sure it was intentional. Iowa, the writers' workshop, is filled with this sort of ego, holier than now vibe, and so his reading was like a big middle finger to that whole vibe and landscape, and I love that too. That was just the act of him just reading his poems in that space. So it's had a lasting effect on me,
Right on.
as a poet. Yeah.
And I'm just curious. I just recorded an episode recently with a guest who we looked at a James Galvin poem. I wonder, was Galvin there at Iowa when you were there?
Yeah, Galvin was there. I unfortunately uh, did not ever have a class with him,
Oh, okay.
um, but he was, a cowboy, and from Wyoming, and um, hard hard guy, like of the earth.
Yep.
You know, Dugan from a different earth. He's from
Right.
the asphalt of New York City and Brooklyn, and Tate. I mean, Galvin from sort of the soil and mountains. So
Yeah.
I guess they were kind of brothers like that. Yeah.
And I've read Dugan's an interview somewhere along the lines saying something to the effect of the the interviewer was basically trying to say, you're sort of a tough street guy yourself, and he basically said, no, man, those people I grew up with would eat me alive right
Yeah,
now.
right.
I'm
I know.
I'm I'm not one of them, but he's also not one of the
That's right.
and so he really does occupy an interesting space. Um, why in the hell is there not an Alan Dugan biography?
I have no idea. I think that he scares people, right? I mean, he retreated to Truro, Massachusetts, right? He lives with his wife, who is a painter.
Up on the Cape, right?
He's Yeah, he's so well revered, especially out there on the Cape. And I think he's buried out there, or his ashes were creamed. I have no idea. I mean, I don't know anymore about anything.
Maybe you
Like,
should be the one to do it.
no,
No?
I don't have that kind of like focus, that ability to focus.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
um,
Have you another connection I want to make here? I had an episode on this series on Frank Stanford, and Dugan and Stanford had a very interesting relationship. I don't know if you've seen this volume of Stanford's, but in the back of this volume, they reproduce a bunch of letters
okay.
between Dugan and Stanford, and they're so fascinating to read.
Yeah, I don't really know much about him. But I do know that he's another person who never really got his due.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but his poems are um, quite compelling and sort of mystical in a way, you know.
Yeah.
So
I mean, he was
I,
the
I
real
don't
deal.
know anything about. I couldn't speak about him at all. Sorry.
He committed suicide at maybe 29, something like
Yeah,
that.
he's young. Yeah.
But his output was incredible. I mean, one of the things he published was an epic poem that I don't know how many lines it was, but it's something like 300, 400 pages long.
Yeah.
One epic poem. So anyway, fascinating guy. Well, let's get back to Dugan. Why did you select this poem in particular? Let me just ask you that.
The honest answer is that my best friend, Michael Morse, who is also a poet, um, and I took a train out to Coney Island. Must have been 30 years ago, with a Dugan collection. And it was winter, so there was nobody on the beach. The cyclone was there, it was empty. You know, we were eating Nathan's hot dogs. And we read this poem to one another at the sea. And it has that line, that last line is something that we toss around to one another um, all these years later. And you know, the poem is about the insignificance of language, and that the sea is smarter than all of us and anything. And it's just, you know, Dugan knew that, and yet he spent his life with words, like me and Michael and all the
Yeah.
rest of us poets who can't really say what we want to say, but do our best to try and get somewhere with language.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
one of the things I would suggest is it's not only about the kind of the failure of language, but of thought
yeah,
itself. In fact, I find it very strange that there's almost an implication that the ocean is thinking,
that's right.
because he says, I love the one thinks, not
Yeah,
I,
right,
not we think, one thinks, which
right.
is
Yeah, yeah,
very strange. Uh, one thinks I must break out his horse, but the ocean doesn't. Okay, at that point, that's easy. Okay, of course the ocean doesn't. It doesn't think. It just is. But then it says it continues through the thought,
that's right.
as if the ocean, yeah, it has that thought too, but it doesn't dwell on it. So to me, it's kind of a weird idea that the ocean, yeah, it may think that too, but it's not caught up in this curse and blessing humans have of abstract thought.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not even concerned with itself, right? The ocean
Right.
doesn't, right?
Right.
It doesn't. It's
Right.
just the ocean, and it grinds things up, just like the cosmos, right?
Yeah.
It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, and that kind of his ability to move from the intimacy of the one or the I, and then the abstract nature of the infinite it's in all of his poems. All of his poems are about death on some level. They're all about dying and extinction and um, unlike, I'm sure you know the poetry of Gerald Stern, right? Do you know his Jerry Stern's work?
I
No.
don't.
Okay, so he just another great American poet, who also grapples with these I and thou topics, but there's so much life and joy in the darkness that he presents us in his work. So a friend of mine, another poet, the other day said, if you don't get death into your poems, then you really shouldn't be writing poems. Like if you're not exploring the
Yeah.
unimaginable, then you shouldn't bother.
I remember seeing Jack Kerouac on the Steve Allen show, and it had to be, I don't know, 1960 or something. And he asked him why he wrote On the Road, and he said, "I wrote it because we're all going to die."
Yeah, right. Same thing. It's the same thing.
Yeah. So what do you make of the title, the fact that he has note, colon? Why not just call it The Sea Grinds Things Up? What do you think the note, what does that do for you?
Because it's like it doesn't even mean it doesn't mean very much. Just a small thing. This is just a small thing. Like it doesn't really like
Yeah.
it's like
No,
the thing you put on the fridge, right? It's like a grocery list.
yeah,
And he was good like that.
yeah,
He didn't.
yeah.
Um,
No big deal. It's just
yeah,
a note. We're all going
yeah.
to die, and the sea is going to grind us up, and then
It's just a lonely situation.
yeah, yeah. Okay, and so I don't know about this one thinks. That throws me off because this may be maybe my ignorance or my bias or something, but that sounds very kind of British and proper. One thinks, and it's so out of character for him. To me, it seems like to say one thinks as opposed to we think or I think.
Right, right.
Anything?
I bet if you had him here, and I don't know why I feel this way or think this way, but if you asked him about it, he would say something like, "Well, that's just what was in my musical toolbox at that moment," like, um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I've never thought about that
certainly
moment.
interesting,
Yeah.
and good description with a lot of nice S's with a C. It slaps down fat. It's wheels and slides. Just nice description of this ocean, these ocean waves coming in. Um, let's see. There's a couple of things I wanted to
Well, let me go. Can I go back to that one thinks moment for a
please
second?
let's do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I, so it's surprising to you, right? It feels a little surprising to you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think that so this is the job of the poet, um, and that is to surprise and disarm the reader at every possible moment in the piece. Like if you really go through this poem, he says, "I'm sorry." Um, I must break out of this horrible cycle. And then he says, I must break out of this cycle of life and death. And then later on, he sings, you think of this cycle as perpetual inventory. And the cycle goes on after every time he uses the word cycle, what comes after is different, right? It's a variation on the thing that was. And so as a reader, you're surprised, but you're not surprised in the way where like a balloon pops, right? And you get freaked out. It's this really smart um, way of repeating, but in a varied way. And as Prince says, there is joy in repetition. It's just how you do the repeating that um, invokes the joy. So perhaps that's what he was doing.
And there's almost a progression. I noticed so the first one, he just calls it a horrible cycle. Got to break out.
Correct.
Second one, he says, okay, now he's saying I got to break up this cycle of life and death. Is a
Right.
little
Yep.
more specific. And
Specifically.
then the last one, which is it confuses me a little bit, but not necessarily in a bad way. I must run out the life part of this cycle, then the death part,
Right. That's it.
then go on as the sequence goes on. It's almost like each time it ups the ante a little bit.
That's
it
right.
describes it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, we kind of glossed over the very opening. It's really kind of cool how right away the first line, it's going on now.
Yeah.
As these words appear to you or heard you. So almost like Whitman, he's addressing the reader. You.
Yeah.
It's as these appear to you or heard by you, which to me ultimately is saying, yeah, you too, you're going to die too.
That's right. Sucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see what else do we want to comment on here.
Let me get
So
to it here.
it's not the last word. Nothing else is talking back. Is that anything other than just there is no God, there is no afterlife, there is nothing out there to you? Nothing else?
Yeah, right. It's just endlessness,
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just endlessness. And so, words and all of that stuff is insignificant because this is just one sea, right? But how many? Just like this is just one planet, and
Yeah, among many.
yeah, and words don't, and will never be able to do justice to whatever it is that the experience is that we are having.
Mm.
I just, and so then it's just lonely, like we're just alone.
And I find that interesting that the last that home run last line there doesn't say I'm lonely.
No.
We are lonely. And so like it's like categorically this is a lonely situation
Yeah.
that we're all in here. Is it lonely? I mean, I think he probably was a guy who felt that loneliness deeply, but is I don't know, maybe I don't want to go down this path. I'm just thinking, is it necessarily lonely?
There are moments of loneliness and there are moments of
Yeah.
solitude and there are moments of, and those two things are different. And there's,
Yeah.
being alone. And I think making stuff, whatever it is that you make, whether you're making a song or a play or a pie or whatever it is, you do out of your aloneness and to fill up some space to bring joy to the world. And even though Dugan was a curmudgeon, I can't tell you how much joy I had in that first moment when he revealed himself to me and the rest of us, no matter how prickly and whatever he might have been. So in that way, I don't think the world is lonely. I think the world is beautiful. And his poetry is, there's nobody else like him, in the canon. And he had a relationship with his loneliness, I guess. I mean, I think we all do, right? I mean, why do you do the podcast, right? Like, or why do you do the, I don't know, do you make music or whatever it is, like these?
Yeah. And in that sense, I just had an episode on Everett Maddox. He's much the same way. There's this incredible pain in his poems and this loneliness and this just, oh man, the guy is tortured, and yet there's a certain joy in it. There's a certain kind of way that And the same thing as you mentioned, Frank Stanford's very much the same way too. Yeah, for sure. Well, let's see. Is there anything else we want to say about this poem or about Alan Dugan?
Uh, I mean, he's really funny too. I mean, if you read his work, right? Like I'm thinking of uh, what's the poem on negative evolution, where um, he writes about this kid Butch who ran over his wife's goddamn daisies, and he should be more careful, Butch,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
you're gonna like ruin the world for the bees, and if the bees get ruined, then we all get ruined, and then we have to go back to the sea and redevelop Gil. I mean, it's just the poem's hysterical,
yeah,
and yet he's talking about carelessness and the state of the planet.
yeah.
And that's another thing that I really like about his. I love that he curses so much. I mean,
Uh-huh.
like he got a mouth on
And
him.
he's so irreverent.
Yeah,
I just happened to go to one in favor of a free public library system, where at the end he says, uh, the palliative answer to your stupid questions, and the answer as to why that liar Nietzsche wrote, "I don't like poets, they lie."
yeah,
You know,
right.
that sort of, you get that, like you said, sort of a curmudgeon, but sort of a funny curmudgeon for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Uh,
went. There was a time. I mean, he's got 7 books, right? One, two, three. Poems
right.
two,
Yeah.
three, four, five, six. So there was a time when I was so obsessed with his work that I was on the hunt for the actual collections,
Really.
and
Yeah.
there was a old barn in upstate New York that had been turned into a used bookstore, and I found 4 of those hardbound,
Nice.
originals, and I felt like I had gotten somewhere, and then I gave them away to friends.
Oh,
No, because that's what you have to do. You have to spread the word. You have to give Dugan back to the world.
it's a lonely situation, man. And
It's a lonely situation.
we
Yeah.
we we fight that by connecting with people and giving them these prize books. Um,
Yeah.
Here's another quote from him. This isn't from a poem. It's from an interview. Someone asked him about John Ashbery, and his
Oh
comment
God.
was, "Ashbery makes a living out of saying nothing."
That's right.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
he's brilliant. He's beautiful.
Gonna
That's
hold
right.
back for sure. And I
No.
just I did mark this one other quote by him that just struck me for some reason. um, in this interview. He says the making of a poem is only partly a conscious decision. Making a poem, like making any work of art, has to be an unconscious, obsessive act. It's only in the work of revision and refinement that the conscious intelligence and reason takes part in the final shaping.
That's
Let
right.
me just ask you, does that resonate with you and how you make poems?
I believe deeply that the poem that I write today is a revision of the poem I wrote yesterday. Uh, and so, in that way, yes, I write every day, and I do it because I don't even know why I do it. It's just some kind of thing driving me, um, and it is completely unconscious. I don't sit down and say I'm going to. I'm just drawn to whatever it is that takes over in me, and it is obsessive for sure,
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
definitely.
Do you
Yeah.
write in your sleep? Do you wake up in the morning and go, oh, where I got to write this down? Kind of thing.
No, I don't do that. But I do write while I'm driving,
Uh,
or I always have music on, so
yeah.
I'm always writing when I'm listening to music, and yeah, and I'm always trying to figure out how to do that thing that I was talking about, which is surprise
Yeah. Yeah.
myself and then the audience. Yeah.
Yeah. uh, as a songwriter and also I write poems. I don't know why I'm reluctant to call myself a poet. I call myself a songwriter. I write songs. I write poems. I think it's okay to call myself a poet. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
I one of the things I like to do is just listen and listen to people talking.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you're on the street or something, and someone will say something. You go, oh, that
Yeah.
phrase right there.
That's right.
I,
That's
I
right.
can do something with that phrase. Now I
You're a
want to.
thief.
What's that?
You're a thief
Yeah,
in the best
absolutely,
way. Yeah.
absolutely. I forget who it was that had this conversation, and someone said something, and they said, "Oh, yeah, that's nice. Consider that stolen." Um,
Yeah.
so before I have you read the poem, if you will, to take us out, I did want to ask you another question about you, which is I know you're a teacher, and it
Yes.
probably comes naturally to you as both a poet and teacher. But I saw from your website that you're what would we call this? You're a writing coach. You
Yes.
do poetry, one-on-one poetry workshops. Is that true?
Correct. That is
Can you
true.
talk to
I
us a little
do.
bit about that and how that works?
Yeah, it's pretty simple and glorious. I mean, I have written, I would say, about 300 lessons, if you will, with prompts. And if people want to take a workshop with me, I run 8, 10, and year-long workshops. And essentially, the way it works is I'll send you a lesson with a prompt. You have a week, you write your poem, you send it back to me, and then I comment on your poem with extensive notes, send it back to you. If you want to do a revision and send it back, I do that as well. And then there's a different iteration, which is brand new, which is really exciting, is that I've created this. I haven't created, but it's a poetry conversation. So I'll write a poem, I'll send it to you, and you will then write your own poem in response to what I've sent you. You'll riff on it. It could be a phrase, could be a mood, could be a tone. You
Mm,
send it back to me. I comment on that, and then I write a poem based on your poem, and it's back and forth. So
nice.
it's more collaborative in that way. And
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, yeah. So
That,
that's what I do.
that made me think of Elizabeth Bishop and One Art and Robert Lowell and Skunk Hour, which was sort of there was a
Yeah,
conversation there. That's really
conversation.
cool. I
Yeah,
actually I want to talk after we sign off. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. And
of
anyone else
course.
that's interested, the show notes will be here. I just signed up last week or 10 days or so ago for the Stafford Challenge. Are you familiar with that?
I am not. Do tell.
Based on William Stafford. It's very loose. You're up to your own devices, but essentially you're just committing to writing one poem a day for a year.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
And
great thing.
yeah, it is. And what I'm seeing here, first of all, I've produced some poems in the last 2 weeks that I never would have produced that I'm pretty damn
That's
proud
right.
of.
Yeah,
And I'm already starting to see down the road that it's going to start. I'm going to have those days where I'm like, shit, I don't know if I can write a poem today or not.
yeah,
And maybe I cop out a little bit and don't write one, or maybe I dash off a haiku, or maybe
yeah,
I just sit down and make myself write one and accept the fact that it may not be great. But and so at the end of a year, I'll have 365 poems. There may be 20 or 30 that are pretty good.
yeah. And then you could put together a little book, and you could get your book out there, and
There
boom.
you go.
Yeah,
There you
there
go.
you go.
Okay.
It's a
All
lovely
right.
situation.
Made better by poetry. Which
Right,
yeah.
right.
So Matthew, do you mind taking us out by reading it? I'd love to hear the poem in your voice.
Of course, of course. And thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
You bet, man. I
Um,
appreciate you
yeah.
doing it.
Note: The Sea Grinds Things Up by Alan Dugan. It's going on now as these words appear to you or are heard by you. A wave slaps down flat. Water runs up the beach, then wheels and slides back down, leaving a ridge of sea foam, weed, and shells. One thinks, I must break out of this horrible cycle, but the ocean doesn't. It continues through the thought. A wave breaks, some of its water runs up the beach and down again, leaving a ridge of scum and skeletal debris. One thinks, I must break out of this cycle of life and death, but the ocean doesn't. It goes past the thought. A wave breaks on the sand, water planes up the beach and wheels back down, hissing and leaving a ridge of anything it can leave. One thinks, I must run out of the life part of this cycle and then the death part of this cycle and then go on as the sea goes on in this cycle after the last word. But this is not the last word unless you think of this cycle as some perpetual inventory of the sea. Remember, This is just one sea on one beach, on one planet, in one solar system, in one galaxy. After that, the scale increases. So this is not the last word, and nothing else is talking back. It's a lonely situation.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing that. Matthew, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
I
And
appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me. It was a joy.
and again, I'll put links in the show notes so that people can find you and find both your own poetry and things like your one-on-one workshops. But I wish you all the best. Take care. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye bye.